This is fascinating. A clip from the ITV morning show 25 years ago, an interview with my main false accuser back then in 2001, where he repeats almost exactly the story he told in court. However, 4 or 5 years earlier than that, he tried to sell his story to the News of the World, who sent a journalist up to interview him, and he gave a detailed interview with that journalist and demanded £250,000 for his story. The journalist went back to London and the editor said this is clearly rubbish and threw it out, and that was the end of that. But we were never shown the transcript of that journalist's interview with Chris Seeley, the man who started it all, my main accuser. You should watch and listen to the points I make as he enumerates his various complaints.
Now, Chris has bravely agreed to waive his anonymity and give us his first television interview this morning. Chris, thank you very much indeed for coming. Now, your testimony helped to jail King, didn't it?
Yes. Mm.
So how did you feel when the judge found him guilty and sentenced him?
I was really pleased, I'm glad that he's, getting punished for what he did to me, really, and for other people as well,
What made you come forward? Because it was a long time before you did.
Yeah, well, it was, it was a real... a secret that I just could not, admit to myself. And what happened was, I heard in the media that he had been arrested for it, and I decided to, I spoke to my brother Nicholas, and he said that I've really got to come forward and, tell the police everything I know about him.
Was Nicholas the first person you talked to about it?
Yeah, the first
You'd
person.
Never said it to anybody from the age of 14 to 32?
No, obviously I told my friends that I knew him, and I bragged about it at school and whatever. But yeah, I'd never told anyone the true facts of what happened.
In court, of course, he admitted he'd tried to sell his story to the News of the World 4 or 5 years earlier for the price of £250,000, but he didn't say much more than that.
What was the court ordeal like for you? Because obviously that must have been fairly horrendous for you.
It was very nerve-wracking, yeah. The Old Bailey's a real daunting place, and coming forward, it really was a hard thing to do. Talking to the police, I really didn't want to talk to the police. I was really scared about it, and worried about whether they'd believe me and everything. But because the other people came forward, and because he had been arrested for it, I felt like, with help from my brother, I felt like it's something that I had to do, not just for me, but for the other people as well that were involved.
What was going through your mind then when you realised there were other people who'd suffered the same fate as you?
Well, I often wondered whether it was going on, and I just thought, it's just got to be told, And I was really pleased that they had come forward, because on my own I wouldn't have been believed, That's how I felt anyway.
So how did you first...
I mean, there's no proof at all, I couldn't prove it.
Yeah, that's what King said, actually. He's keeps going on about the fact that he's innocent, and it's his word against yours, and it happened so long ago.
Mm.
I mean, does that annoy you now, the fact that he's still not accepting the verdict?
Yeah, but I can see in a way how he can't come forward. He's such a big-headed person, and he's got so much front and everything, and for his life to be ruined, I mean, it must be such a hard thing for him to admit to himself, what the crimes that he's done.
Well, take us back 18 years then. How did you first meet him?
My mother used to take these Spanish students out on excursions every weekend, and they used to come over for a month or about 6 weeks during the summer, they'd had one excursion down to London, and I went down with my mum and that, and I didn't want to walk around with her and all these Spanish students.
Your family home's Cambridge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it came to London, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't want to be walking around with them. It sounded pretty boring going around the galleries and all that at 14. And I said to my mum, I'm going to pop off for a couple of hours, go and have a look around Hamleys and Harrods and a few other places.
Just to be clear, exactly what he said to Sean O'Brien, the News of the World reporter, a few years earlier. He was on a visit to London with a friend. He said that it was either a record shop or an amusement arcade that they were located in when they were approached by King. Although I believe I was told he did not visit King's home at that first meeting, he did subsequently go to King's home on later visits. Very clear and very detailed.
And I'll meet you back, what time we meet? And she said, well, meet back here at 5, be careful and all that. And I went off on my own, and I went straight to Carnaby Street and found Soho. And I was wandering around Soho, my eyes like that, like, wow, looking at all these.
First time?
Yeah, first time in London on my own. Obviously I've been through it, yeah. And then he just came up to me, and said...
Now, let me be clear about this. Had we, the defence, known about his story given to O'Brien 4 or 5 years earlier, we would have first of all found and contacted the Spanish friend who was with him when they met and flown him into London to give evidence at the trial. But secondly, under those circumstances, he would have been questioned in cross-examination. But hold on a moment, you were with this Spanish friend. This is completely different from the story you go on to tell saying you're on your own. And that is absolutely crucial. Had the jury and the judge heard this and known this, they would have acquitted me 100% certain.
Oh, do you know who I am and all that? And my first thought was I recognised him and I thought he was a friend of my dad's. I said, are you a friend of my dad's? And he said, no, I'm off the television. You must recognise me from Top of the Pops, and started reading off all these programmes he had been
So you were
on.
just walking along the street, and he just literally
I was actually looking
to...
through some records at the market in Soho, and then he said to me, have you been in any of the peep shows? And I said, no, I can't get in them. I'm only 14. And he said, oh, I might be able to get you in one. And we walked off round this corner, and he took me into one, went up to the woman. I didn't really see what was going on, but he whispered something to her, and it looked like he gave her some money. And the next thing I knew, he was ushering me into one of the little cubicles. Gave me a handful of 50p's and said, just keep putting them in every time the letterbox thing goes down. And after a couple of minutes, it really hit the reality of it hit me, and I just said, I've got to get out of here. He started to touch me a bit, and I just had to get out of there. I walked out of the peep show, started walking off down the street, and he sort of caught up with me. He was sort of lagging behind a bit because I was like walking quite quickly, and he caught up with me, and we turned this corner, and he said, do you fancy coming back to my house and we'll get some girls round and we'll have a little party and all that? And I was, I was a bit gobsmacked, and but it did sound exciting to me, and he pointed out his car, big, lovely, great big Rolls Royce.
Yeah.
Before I knew what I was doing, I was in his car driving around, nice stereo, it was all lovely walnut dash, and it, really flash. And
Do you think it was the fame and celebrity that made you go with him? If it had been a stranger?
Oh yeah, no doubt at all.
Right.
And definitely being famous, and and I felt as if I don't know why, but I felt as if I could trust him.
You trust him,
yeah.
So then you got to his house and you had a bottle of ginger beer or something.
Yeah, he said, do you want a drink? And he said, I haven't got any alcohol. And I said, oh, what, don't you drink? He said, no, I don't drink and I don't take drugs. Which I thought was good and that. And I was looking around in his lounge, and he's got the gold discs and all these photos of like famous people, Mick Jagger and Phil Collins and people like that. And I was just walking around, and I felt really on a buzz,
But it was at that afternoon that he actually did rape you.
Yeah. That's, within about half an hour, he pulled out a stack of photos, must have been about this big, and it's all Polaroid pictures, and he started looking.
Pornographic.
He said, I'll have a look at these, and he said, pick out the girl that you like the most, and I'll give her a ring and see if I can get her around here.
My girlfriend at the time was Samantha Fox. And in his interview with the journalist of the News of the World, he said he met Samantha Fox. Of course, he didn't say that in his latest police statement, because he knew full well if asked, she'd say, "I never met this man."
And
It was all girls then?
there was a few photos of him, and he played this funny sort of game. Every time he got to a photo of him, he would grab it off me and go, "Oh no, you don't want to see that." So that I would go, "Oh, let's have a look, and he'd be, "Oh no, you know, you don't have a look at that."
What, him naked?
Yeah, and then it would be a picture of him naked, yeah. And then I'd go, you know, and then I'd just carry on looking through, you know.
So this was his way of getting you to, you know, have sex with him?
Yeah. Before I knew what was happening, he said, "Oh, you got to see my bathroom." And I went up to his bathroom, and he's got all these mirrors everywhere, and it was really flash bathroom. Must have had about 1,000 bottles of aftershave all round the bathroom.
What was going through your mind? I mean, it's a long time ago, but did you think this was maybe the normal thing to do, or was this something you hadn't yet experienced?
Yeah. As I grew up with it, I felt, you know, every time I watched telly and saw Jonathan King with people, I always thought, "Oh yeah, I bet there's something going on between them."
Did you?
know, yeah.
Now that's something a lot of people want to know. That was the first time you met him. He buggered you, pardon my French, and you then had a resulting relationship with him for 3 years. Why did you bother to go back?
Well, it's I know it must seem hard for people to understand this, but when I got home after the first experience, I was all on a buzz, and I had all these records and books that he'd given me, and I was, you know, bragging about it to my mates. Yeah, look, you know, and you know, I was really on a buzz, and then he was sending me postcards from around the world, and he said, in one of the postcards, he said, "Yeah, well, next time I'm in town, I'll give you a ring, and we'll try and meet up." And if I had turned around to my parents and said, "Oh no, I'm not going to go down there," they would have thought there was something funny straight away, you know. "Why don't you want to go down there?" Because my dad actually, he took me to one side after the first time it happened. He took me to one side, took me in his little study, and said, "Chris, tell me the truth. You know, tell me, you know, has anything happened at all? Has he tried anything on at all with you?" And I just said no, you know.
Why? That was your golden opportunity to say, "I don't want to see
that's
it
what they
again."
said in court. They said, you know, "Why didn't you come out right at the beginning? Then we could have gone to the peep show, and we could have, like, you know, dealt with it then. Like 20 years later, there's nothing we can really do about it," sort of thing. And
in the 60s, 70s and 80s, I had something called the King's Army. I used to give out loads of free promotion records to people who I met, in various different people in various different ways, all different ages, genders and everything else. And if they were interested in music, I would send them free copies of promotion records that I was working on. And if they liked the tracks, ask them to spread the word and do things like call DJs and request it on the radio, go into record shops and ask if it was selling and that sort of thing. It was a wonderful way to break records. That was why I spoke to and met Chris Seeley, and nothing to do with sex.
I know it's difficult
Looking
you know,
back, yeah.
And it's wrecked your life, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, I've been on drugs, battling with heroin. I'm on methadone now, and I'm on the road to recovery, but it's only through coming forward and actually saying it all and getting it off my chest, because it's like being embedded in me.
Has it been a therapeutic experience, the fact that you're seeing him put in jail for what he committed?
Yeah,
has it helped you clear your mind? And
yeah, and
what are your relationships like with women now, or what have they been like? Have they been?
Well, I've always kept it a secret to my girlfriends, you know.
Yeah.
So, and you can't have a proper relationship with someone if you can't tell them your innermost feelings and everything. And I found I couldn't have normal sexual relationships with girls without being a little bit kinky, you know, and I felt it was the norm. Like I took photographs of my girlfriends without clothes on, and it was like I was trying to be sort of like him in a way. I started to a little collection of photos of girlfriends, and until I started going out with one girl, and obviously she saw them, and she said, "Oh, look, you want to be getting rid of all them? I'm not going to let you take photos of me." And I threw them all away, and from then on. I've started realising, I was scared that I was going to turn into him. I was really scared that I was turning into a bit of a pervert. And
you notice that John Leslie is beginning to be a little bit uncomfortable. I think both he and Fern Britton were starting to spot that Seeley was at least exaggerating, if not inventing a lot of this. And he is getting rather nervous himself. He's going into unrehearsed territory, and you can see him feeling uncomfortable.
It's got worse and worse as the years have gone on.
No, I wouldn't really say that.
Now that he has been sentenced and found guilty, does that make you feel any better at all? Is it a therapeutic experience?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm not happy about, you know, everyone knowing what's happened to me. I feel ashamed of it, you know. I do feel really ashamed of it, and...
But not alone?
No, not alone, yeah.
Have you found help in the other victims, if you like?
Well, I haven't met any of them. Like, they said to me I could go to court and watch him being sentenced, and on the day of the sentencing, and I didn't really want to go along. I said, nah, you know, I didn't really want to go along. It's just a feeling of sort of ashamed, and people pointing at me and laughing at me. It's that sort of feeling. I feel people are going to, you know, oh, he's a homo and all that, you know, and, you know, that really sort of upsets me to think that people are going to think, you know, like that about me.
Well, Raj has been sitting very quietly listening to all of this. Is Chris's response to what happened, is that a normal response to any child who was abused and as an adult feels this way?
Yeah, and it's, you know, very brave of you to come forward and talk about these very difficult issues. And there's some really important lessons in there for parents and children alike listening to this, because this is a taboo subject that often doesn't get talked about. One of the really big points is that the fantasy we all have is that it's someone who looks very dodgy and odd that actually ends up sexually abusing children. It's actually very often someone who parents trust. And by definition, it's because the parents trust that person's allowed to have a lot of time with the children without any kind of surveillance.
We didn't bring that up, did we? But he'd been in contact with your parents, hadn't he?
Yeah,
to make sure the coast was clear and things.
Yeah, I told him that my dad had taken me to one side, and they were a bit, you know, worried that something might be going on. And, you know, I told him, I told my dad obviously that nothing was going on, and Jonathan King was writing letters to me and putting in it, you know, bits to my parents, you know, I hope your parents are well.
How clever.
Is
Yes,
this the normal?
yes, that's right. They build a relationship with the parents to make sure the parents don't suspect that person. So that's another key point. Another key thing is about the fact that for 3 years you were going back to him voluntarily. And part of what that's about is the fact that a child can often be entranced by the promises that an abuser gives them. And a lot of us have this old-fashioned view of a stranger offering sweeties to children. It's actually this classic thing of promises. He kept promising you that you'd meet these famous people, and it's the promises that draw the child into this world. And the child is in a conflict because they feel that all these entrancing things that are happening to them and they're being promised will stop if they actually, you know, speak out about this. And another key thing that happened, because when you were wandering around Soho for the first time, he probably could see that you were young and it's the first time you'd been out on, you know, in the world. And he did something there in getting you into the peep show, which meant that you would have found it difficult to talk to your parents about that, because it would have meant owning up to something you'd done wrong. And they're very clever.
So you're incriminating yourself.
That's right. So they're very clever at this kind of manipulation. They make it difficult for the child to actually be frank with the parents. And that's why it's very important that parents speak to children up front and say, look, if anything's happening, I won't be angry. And it's very important that you let me know about it. So I think that's, you know, another important lesson. But all the classic signs were there. And that's why it's very important that you've spoken out about what happened to you. Because sexual abuse to children is a lot more common than it's openly admitted. Some surveys suggest 1 in 5 women have at some time had some kind of untoward sexual incident, you know, below the age of 16.
That's true. I think that's
or
pretty
1 in 10
conservative.
Men. Yeah.
I mean, as a child and lots of girlfriends as well.
Yeah.
When you're a child walking along the street, cars would slow down and the window would unwind and a man would say, oh, can you tell me the way to, and would you just get in the car and show me? Now, I was always, you know, it happened once or twice to me, and I remember saying no very clearly.
So parents need to be educated about to tell their children that these strangers will flatter you, they'll promise things, and these are the danger signs to look for.
Chris bottled it up for quite a long time. Why don't people come forward when there's so much, especially with the likes of this case, there's so much press attention on it? You would think that, well, therefore they're just going to go to the police station or tell somebody that, look, it's happened to me.
Well, it's a very good question, and partly it's the shame and embarrassment, but partly the manipulation is so good that the child blames themselves for what happened, and that's why they find it very difficult. And also the abuser, in a very distorted way, the way they're thinking about it, they're not realising that they're manipulating a child, so they don't blame themselves. They think the child voluntarily took part in this, and that's why so many abusers are in denial, even after they've been convicted.
Also, it's being particular about Jonathan King, he's a man with powerful charm. Have you ever met him?
I haven't met him actually, no.
I met him a long time ago. He was the most charming man, and I thought, what
We had
a
lots
jolly
of
nice
character
bloke.
witnesses as well, didn't he?
Well,
Turning up at court.
when he used to ring up to speak to me, it was a sort of a ploy so that he could talk to my parents as well. Like obviously my parents used to answer the phone a lot, and then he would say, "Oh, it's Jonathan, I'm ringing up to speak to Chris," and he'd build up a little rapport with them before he got to speak to
So
me.
even they would be duped by his
Yes.
they were
status.
duped. sort
I'm
of
sure
by him
they
as
feel
well.
bad about it too.
And that's why a child will find it difficult to speak to the parents. If he thinks the parents are good friends with this other person, that also makes it difficult for the child to break the confidence.
Right. Chris, thank you very much indeed for coming. We appreciate you very much talking to us frankly.
Can I just say a thank you to a couple of people, to Anne Clark at Dash, who's my counsellor with my drug problem and that, and who's been a good help, and my brother Nick Seeley, and Andy Clare, who's a good friend of mine, who's been there all the way.
Chris, thank
Pleasure.
you.
I liked Chris Seeley. He was a dreadful pest, and eventually I had to even change my phone number to get rid of him, and he kept on calling me and coming round until he was into his 20s. He was always, or nearly always, a total heroin addict. He lied again and again, as you can see if you read Bob Woffordon's book, The Nicholas Cases, and he passed away a few years ago, looking very ill and very unwell. I sent a couple of private investigators to visit him. He always repeated his story parrot fashion, as though he'd learnt it every single line. I do feel sorry for the man, and he was an entertaining character and a wicked but fun person. But the main point I want to make here is the police failing to disclose the News of the World interview that he gave to Sean O'Brien, the journalist. And we only found out about that in 2017, at the beginning of when all the disclosure had to come in and for the other trial in which I was acquitted on all charges, quite rightly. And this was fascinating to see, because basically and essentially it's clear that the police deliberately only gave certain small facts to the defence team, such as he'd asked for £250,000 on the News of the World, but did not disclose the transcript of the interview because it would have completely destroyed his case. We are now saying to the CCRC, the Criminal Case Review Commission, please send this case back to the Court of Appeal so that my wrongful conviction can be overturned.